Extend a word of welcome to each of you to tonight's presentation. If we have not met before, my name is Brian DePalma, and I'm the Associate Pastor here at Willow Avenue Mennonite Church. It is a real delight to be able to welcome each of you to this evening's presentation. It grows out of conversations we've had as a congregation as we've asked about what it means for us to be better neighbors, to be better relatives with all those whose lives intersect with ours in this particular place and time. So we're grateful to have you as part of this conversation and hope that it generates those sorts of questions for you. We are delighted to be able to recognize Dr. Goode, who I am sure to many of you need no introduction, but he is the tribal chair of the North Fork Mono, and we are delighted to have him start a three-part presentation that we hope will provide a brief introduction to local Indigenous history and contemporary realities. Tonight, Dr. Goode will discuss local Indigenous history and culture before European contact. Next week, we're delighted to welcome Christina Gonzalez to explore how local Indigenous people negotiated colonization, and then we'll have a final session 2 weeks from tonight with William Kinney Barrios and Audrey Osborne, who will talk about the contemporary realities of local Indigenous people. So we hope that collectively these three sessions introduce you to that. In just a moment, we'll welcome Dr. Goode, and I will quit talking because you all are here to hear him, not me. But first, a couple of thank yous to people who have made this evening possible. Special thanks to Dr. Sydney Beckman, who helped organize tonight and the other events. Speakers, we're most grateful to her. She also helped start things off for us as a congregation a few weeks ago with a critical introduction to land acknowledgments, something that's helping us as a congregation think about what we will do afterwards, after we've learned some of the things tonight and in the following weeks. After Dr. Goode has a chance to share with us, we'll have a time of question and answers at the end. Anticipating that, I will encourage you to keep your questions brief to a sentence or two, because we are all here to hear from Dr. Goode. So with that, I will turn it over to him. Thank you again to each of you for being here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Seemed like he was pretty loud. I don't know why. Doesn't seem like there we go. Okay. Yeah. You have to learn how to use these things. Well, good evening, everybody. I see some friendly faces and some brand new ones. So this is a pretty interesting topic, land acknowledgement. And thank Dr. Sydney for inviting us and putting us on the agenda, and she's got some really good speakers coming in. Not that I'm including myself in that, but just a point of interest is that many decades ago, several decades ago, we started hearing about land acknowledgement, and in part, just to be transparent with you, in part was because whatever event, wherever it was that we were presenting, the people didn't really want to hear a blessing. They didn't want to hear our prayers. They didn't really want to hear our songs. So it was easier for them to do a land acknowledgement and say, well, here's who you are and where you are. And we understood that because, what I'm going to be talking about tonight, but in terms of where we've come from, we weren't recognized as having a spirituality or a religion, as most people call what they believe in. But we don't have a church because our church is out there. Our church is what Creator created. We don't come to a building to hold service. We're out there in the woods We're out there on the land. We're at the river. We're wherever we decide to gather in whole spirituality. And so these things were always hard for, being accepted in who we are and where we are. I'm kind of talking about this because I've been in these deep conversations lately, including today, about exactly where Native Americans are, where we've come, and where we're going. And what that means is looking at acceptance in one role, all right? Not as a whole, just in one role, which means that no more than 5 or 6 years ago, it was hard for our people to voice their opinion publicly, openly, without feeling some problem of that they're going to be creating to them or to their family. Now, I'm noted because of cultural fires that I do around the state and out of state, working with tribes to put fire back on the land. But when I started that in 2000, my elders came to me and said, "You're going to get us in trouble. You're going to get us in trouble. We know you won't be in trouble, but we will be." And they're talking about what happened to them pre-1850 or 1850 to 1950. The things that they have had to go through, the struggles that they went through, even if it's not the ones that are alive today, because they've been told by their grandparents and great-grandparents, and they know what this is all about. I was doing a talk just last night in Merced University, and talking in terms about what we're doing with cultural fire, and that cultural fire is about the culture, not about the fire. And so when I talk to the agencies, and I work with my good friend right here, Jane, from the Forest Service, that all the agencies have always just, they hear the word fire, and they compute that to flame, and they compute that to the way they burn, and they compute that to wildfires and, control burns and all these kind of different terminologies that apply to what they think is fire. But for us, it's about the return of our culture. That just 6, 8 years ago, I have people, my elders, or not even elders, just general people, young people, telling me that when they were out on the state park, on the creek, to gather roots or gather sticks or whatever they were doing down there, they had to hide when the state park man went through. Hide so they didn't get caught, didn't get a ticket, didn't get fined, didn't get put in jail. They had to hide when they were on private property so they didn't get shot, so the dog didn't bite them. Just to go get sticks or berries or roots to keep their culture alive. And now we have land back. Now we have places to where we are helping to revitalize that land. And now our basket makers can go there anytime they want. I know I got one in here someplace. I don't know where she's at. Where's Mary? Go back here. Way in the back. And she knows, and they all know now, that they can go anytime they want. They just call me up, We got to want to get some sticks. Okay, all right. I'm going to go get berries. Okay. In 2010, I had 2 basket makers. This past weekend, there were 3 groups of basket makers. One group had tables all set up. Others had canopies all set up. Well, all within the size of our camp. And that's what I'm looking at. And then that listening to their stories, listening to their songs, listening to their laughter. That is, to me, the most intriguing part of the return of culture, is that they are laughing. Because they feel good. They're not looking over their shoulder. They're not worried about who's coming to get them and not get them. And that is the return of our culture here in 2026. This is a renewal song. Tuia puna kui no ka. Tuia puna kui no kagi. Tuia puna kui no ka. Tuia puna kui no kagi. Tuia puna kui no ka. Tuia puna kui no kagi. Atamana kwea kui no ka. Atamana kwea kui no kagi. Atamana kwea kui no ka. Tuia puna kui no ka. Tuia puna kui no kagi. 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 Atamana kwea 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 kui no kagi. Woo, 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 woo. All 4 directions, all our relatives. Mana. Thank you. So, the little talk I'm doing tonight is something that I wrote when I was a professor in City College. Research that I did on, it's like 41 pages, not that I going through every one of them, but researching historical books, researching elders, other people of stories, and things that are written about the pre-contact, first contact of coming in here. So, how far back do you want me to go? So anyway, let's start with the Central Valley for now. And the mission periods were being established in 1770, 1776, 1779 time period. I forgot how many missions there was, like 21 missions, 4 presidios, were all trying to be established. And what never happened is a single mission or presidio inside of the San Joaquin Valley, this side of the mountain range. That's the one thing that, we try to make sure that everybody understands, that that was never established. They tried. There were some land grants that came in up into the late 40s. But that's about as far into what we got established here in this area. So why not? Some of the very first people that came in here, Father Crispy came in, Phages came into this area, and he was the Commander Don Pedro Phages, and later Francisco Garces, and then Moragas, both father and son came. Phages came in around 1772, 1776, started making his move into the valley. And so we have a very interesting story. And that is, I call it the horse story. And I grew up in North Fork in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and west of me was a mountain called Fish Creek Mountain. It went up 3,500 feet. And then on the other side of me was Hyame Mountain. It went up 2,500 feet. And we would climb, my mother and I would climb the top of Hyame. And we could look over Fish Creek, and then we could see the Coast Range. And she would point out to me, you see that gap way over there? Well, they call that Pacheco Pass. And then if you come down south, it's Indian Canyon. And if you keep going way down south, that goes to Ventura. I said, wow. And she said, they were trails. They were trails, and there's many stories. And, we have the Padre story, which, I can't tell you in church. But they came from down there. And this story, though, happens to be the horse story. So our people were great runners. We're mono. We're nim in our own language, meaning the people. Mono is not our word. Mono means monkey or doll in the Spanish words. They also refer to us sometimes as Manachis. But the word Manachi comes from the Wakchumnis, and that means cliff climbers, people who went over the mountains to trade with the Paiutes and Lone Pine and all the other different tribal people, and brought trade goods back and traded with the Indians down here. Preferably, rabbit blankets was the number one, and obsidian was big. A couple of big items that they would go over there and bring back to this side of the mountain. And so so our people ran across the valley, and they caught Captain Phages up in a little place called Hellier Avenue. And I've been up that way, and the mountain makes a real nice turn, and it goes back into this kind of a cave-like landscape, and the Gilroy tribe was there. Well, anyway, he came in there and, and raised havoc with them. But our people ran over there, over the mountain, and caught him. And they beat him up, all of his soldiers. They took his horses, they took his whiskey, and they took some of the Gilroy girls, brought them home. I guess I don't know if they ran them or threw them on the horse, but, definitely ran the horses. And then when we got back, they ate the horses. They put them in big pit barbecues and cooked them up. Well, the horse wasn't faster than they were, so what else was the horse for? Must have been good to eat. He can't run. Can't outrun us, so all right. Just a couple of years ago, we had the pandemic, and not much you can do during the pandemic. So we decided to go out on our trails and record our trails, record our historic trail. And already some of the maps the Forest Service had bits and pieces of our trails, like the Horseshoe Bend Trail, around 7 miles down along the San Joaquin River. So it connected to Smalley Cove and San Joaquin River Gorge. So we started tracking that trail, went out and GPS'd it, put it on a map, climbed up Fowler Mountain, climbed up Fish Creek Mountain, went down the other side of Fish Creek Mountain. Very interesting, because as we went down, the ridge was not bigger than in the width of this building. And the trail was just about what you see right here between the benches. That was the actual trail. And then it cut off down the canyon and around the side of the mountain and down to the bottom of San Joaquin River Gorge. I said, well, strange way to go. But once I got down further on the flat, what we call Kennedy Flats, it's a big plateau. And I started talking to my buddy, Bart Topping. And Bart is Chowchilla. And Bart said, my people have always lived here. I said, well, how did you get up to the plateau? He said, up on this ridge over here on this other side. I said, I see. And he took me up there, and we saw bedrock after bedrock. I could take one rock and throw it over there and hit another bedrock. I said, how many people lived here? He said, maybe 4,000. Right here? He said, yeah. Okay. Now it makes sense why we went around the hill. It didn't come down over here. And our trail out of here to where the horses were was down around the north side, off the canyon, around Hildreth Mountain. One little trail. So I tell you that story because that's the same trail that we brought the horses back, and the same trail that the Spaniards followed us. And we were up at a place called Tipkin Flat, and that's where they pit barbecued them. Well, we've been up there. We went and looked around. We can see the little avenue that they came through, and probably where they pit barbecued. So the soldiers came, of course, and they caught our Indians, and they maybe took some of their horses back, and maybe they took some of the women. I imagine most of the whiskey was gone. And they went back. This time they went back down toward Indian Canyon, and San Juan Bautista wasn't established yet, but they were there in that area, Hollister. So they had to go through Indian Canyon. So our people followed them a couple of weeks later. They let him rest a little bit. And they went down there, and they caught him, and they beat him up again. And they brought his horses back, and maybe some of the women from Hollister brought him back over, all right? And we're pit barbecuing again, only this time they left the women and children out there. And when the soldiers came, our boys beat them up pretty bad. That's our story. You go here to Fresno State Library on the 4th floor, and you'll find Phage's story. And Phage's story is exactly the same, except that he did all the beating up. They let our people beat them up so they could follow us back and then massacre us. Well, we're still here. They're still here. So nobody's story was correct, but the stories do line up, which is fantastic because Phage's story, I'm talking 1770s, and they were interpreted by the priests. And it's right here in our Fresno State Library. But to validate what our stories are, you know, we don't need that validation, but it was pretty cool to be able to see that and understand that these stories actually did exist. Now, as we move forward, some of my elders would always say, oh, we go to the coast today. And when we go to the coast, the Indians over there always call us cousin. I guess they say we're related. I said, I see. And I go down to Indian Canyon, and they call me uncle. Hey, you know, all right. I said, I guess we're related. So these trails took us to all these different places. And it was important for us to record those trails. But again, the early folks, you know, didn't make it too far. Gabriel Moraga, not Gabriel, his father, Moraga, came in first. And then he made it quite a ways into the valley. He made it into Madera area and crossed the river and went one day up into the mountains. So there's all kinds of reports. Sometimes they say, well, he went to Mariposa, and other times if he crossed the ford down below Madera, then he went to North Fork. So, you know, but in any event, when his son came 20 years later, in 1802, 1804, our people could speak Spanish to him already in that amount of period of time, you know. So kind of interesting to see, you know, and hear some of that why did that happen? How could that happen, you know? But I'm also telling you this in terms of how fast the tribes of the San Joaquin Valley and the tribes of the mountains were able to adapt. And that's what this whole story is really going to be about as we proceed through, how they adapted and how they're still adapting, you know, and where we are as leaders in this community, as, you know, and yet still maintaining our culture. That's the important part, that our language is still being kept, our cultural practices are still being kept, but, you know, lots of things took place. So then after Gabriel Moraga came, there were several others who started coming in. You know, we started to have, the British started working their way down, Russians started making their way down, Americans coming in, a lot of explorers, and people looking for beaver, you know, looking up and down the streams. We get in the 20s, you got Jedediah Smith and Kit Carson and some of these famous names that you've read in books before and heard about, and many of them were coming through at this particular time. Then in the 1830s, you know, others like Ewan Young and a few others started coming in. But things were changing quickly for the tribes, and especially in the 1830s, disease came. And it came hard. Smallpox, diphtheria, yellow fever. The worst was pneumonia. And you're like, okay. Oh, and TB. But why was pneumonia the worst? Well, here's what happened. Our people had no way to combat these diseases except what they normally did: cleansing, fasting, sweating, and herbs. All the things that normally kept them healthy. So, when they were sick, they went to the sweat lodge. And they sweated, got it all out of them. But they forgot. And they went and took a bath. They jumped into the cold water like they normally do after a good sweat. Got pneumonia. And then they all died. Why a bad story like that? Because in 1968, when I went to college, play football and baseball, living with my dad got sick. My stepmother worked for a doctor, so he came over, and he was in the room with my dad for a while, and he says, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, he's pretty ill." I said, "Yeah, well, we know that." "Well, he's not going to make it." I said, "Why not?" "Well, because he's got pneumonia." "So?" "Well, he's Native American, isn't he?" "Yes." "Well, Native Americans die when they get pneumonia." It's like, oh my gosh. This is 1968. And I'm like, "Okay, thank you, Doc." Bye. Went and grabbed my dad and said, "Come on, let's go. You're going to the hospital. That's it." You're not dying. And he didn't die just then either. So from that point forward, though, in 1968, we established all of our Indian clinics that are all up and down the California and other places, other states having Indian clinics. But they got established out of North Fork, and when I came back in the 70s, that was one of the key elements to our Indian clinics, is that our people die from pneumonia. I said, again, it was like, no. That's just something you read or heard, and it goes back to 1833, 1834, and doesn't have anything to do with whether we die from pneumonia or not. It's just, don't go jump in ice cold water after you've taken a sweat when you're sick, So we changed these things. But in the 1830s, 1840s was another high period. We lost villages after village during this time period. And then, of course, was the coming of the gold rush, 1848 through 1850s, like 100,000 people. If you haven't any thought about that, think about it. Think about it in terms of what 100,000 people are coming through your neighborhood. Don't care what kind of fences you got. Don't care what you think you own. They're looking for gold. Get out of our way. That must have been pretty devastating. Pretty hard to think about it in terms of what they did. Now, I'm going to back up just a little bit. Because again, back into the 1920s, 1928, more of the soldiers started coming into this area. When I grew up and I read the history books and listened to the history teachers, I was told there was only one Indian war, up north, and that's it. Well, when I read these papers over, we had numerous Indian wars, small, but still effective. Now, I'm trying to give you the idea of how effective, or what this is, what this means, and especially in terms of our culture. These soldiers had guns, big guns. We had no guns. We had bows and arrows. Normally, as a hunter, you might have 5 or 6 arrows in your quiver. What do you need 5 or 6 arrows for? You only need 1 or 2. But we probably had 5 or 6. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Nice full quiver. And maybe 5 or 6 more back at camp. What these guys are talking about in terms of the fights that lasted 4 days, and that the Indians shot arrows at them for 4 days, day and night. How do you do that? Not possible. Unless your people are out there just as we are when we went to war in World War II, World War I, Korean War, Vietnam War. Everybody goes to work, and everybody becomes a contributor. Now, for the Indian people to go out and gather shafts, arrow shafts, which was mostly gray willow or could be button willow, but you had to have these resources in good shape. They couldn't be like we see them along the roads now, thick, not growing straight, 5 or 6 limbs growing off of one shoot. No, they all had to be straight up and down shoots, just like our basket makers want them. The arrow makers wanted them the same way. So they tended them, pruned them, manicured them, burned them. Were they planning on war? No. They're just planning to make sure their resource was good. But when war came, they were able to go out and harvest these shafts, make the arrow shafts, take them back to grandpas and uncles, and they put the arrowheads on them, and they were able to keep shooting arrows for 4 days and 4 nights. And this was numerous from mid-1820s, not 19, 1820s, well into 1840s. Well, no, even into 1850s, almost 1860. The Paiutes and some of the Tulare Indians had battles in 1956, and the Paiutes were fighting in 1863, about some of the last ones that we had. Wow, so pretty amazing what it took them to be able to retain, keep their culture and sustain their culture in that sense. The other aspect, too, is as we come through these time periods and start looking at one of the things I'm working on right now is water rights. And so a pair of gentlemen were running cattle from Mexico, Miller and Lux. and maybe some of you have heard them. And they bought water from the tribes by paying, giving them cattle or giving them horses or whatever they needed so they could bring their cattle through, take them up to their capital of Monterey and then eventually Sacramento and San Francisco. And this worked for a while. But also the one thing that they made note of is how many of the different tribes ate horses. There are numerous of tribes because it wasn't because they were hungry. They had plenty of food to eat, but they evidently liked horse. You know, so horse was good. Liked horse better than cow. But at the same time, horse grew. At the same time, the fall of the mission, because of their, let's say, ruthlessness of coming into the villages, just literally taking people, kind of like ICE today, huh? But just coming in and taking people out of the villages and taking them back to the missions to work. Well, again, there were some of our people who were good leaders, and they started coming up through the system. And they said they got trust as they made their way to the top. And they started telling the mission padres and the soldiers, hey, look, give me a few horses, and I'll go over and I'll talk to the villages and the tribes, and I'll make trade. And I'll bring you people, good people to work. Not just anybody. I'll bring you good people to work. And they said, well, okay. So they listened to him. Several hymns, actually, from different missions. This is what they would do. And they started bringing horses in. And they started training everybody in the village how to ride these horses, how to take care of these horses. Until these horses in the San Joaquin Valley, there were more horses here than on the plains. Hundreds and hundreds of horses went out of here, back to Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Washington, British Columbia. Tribes, other people coming in, explorers. Lots of people came in to get horses from the San Joaquin Valley. So the horse trade became pretty huge in what they could do, and they adapted. They learned what they needed to do and how to survive. And so they did. So there's all these different little intricacies that, went on during these time periods. And yes, there was, like I said, the disease came in and hit them hard, and many other things. You got overrun by the populations, But they made it through. Clear into the 60s, 1860s time period. And in the 1860s, we're talking Civil War. And so, there was a little bit of a break there on the Indians for a little while. But then they came back. And things did change a little bit at that point in time. And so I'm going to move you forward kind of quickly now in terms of 1865, was the Homestead Act, developed for the people coming into California to purchase land, the Homestead Act. Except the first people that came right here in this area, especially my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Kinsman, first white man into Fresno County, 1848 time period. He came in up that same trail I was talking about, up at San Joaquin River Gorge. Found him a woman and went way back there in the back, in a place called Kinsman Flat. And he got all the uncles and all the brothers and everybody else to start buying up land through the Homestead Act. And he was signing off on them. And so our people ended up with large segments of land as we went through the Homestead Act, 1865. And then came the Reservation Act, around 1865 to 1872, 73, Tule Indian Reservation being the last one established. It's also the largest one. It was supposed to be set up on Tejon Ranch, which is on the Grapevine, going over to Los Angeles. All that mountain, they were going to put all the Indians over there on that mountain, get them out of the way. But the commissioner laid claim to 750,000 of acres, the Indian commissioner. So then they moved them down to outside of Porterville, Success Lake area. And then his secretary laid claim to the land. All right, nice piece of land. So then they moved the Tule Indians back into the hole that they are now. They just recently came out because now they have casinos out in the town of Porterville. But until then, they've been back there in that rock pile where they got put. And they're still fighting for water rights as well. Now, move forward a little bit to 1889, called the Dawes Act. Again, another act for Americans to come through and lay claim to land. But it also allowed Indians to lay claim to allotment lands. And again, what it was designed to do was the reservations that got set up, the government wanted the reservations to be broke up into family lots. So these allotments were all a part of the reservation system, sometimes outside of the reservation, but most of the time inside. So including Tule Indian Reservation, which is 56,000, well, now 63,000, they have 6 allotments inside of their reservation that are basically what we call privately owned, because allotments went to individual families and what we call asset holders. The North Fork Mono tribe, during the next period of registration in 1910, we picked up over 52 Indian allotments, the most of any tribe in the state. We currently still have 18 under the tribe's jurisdiction. And we have a rancheria, On top of that, we don't belong to the rancheria because we technically have all this other land, allotments, homesteads, homeland, and the rancheria just has their land base. So, hey, they're fine. Okay, they're building themselves a casino now. Good luck, good for them. We're still doing fine. And point being is that this is how the tribes, the families within these tribes continued to adapt with what was coming over. They were picking up their own lands. And so now that's the way many of our tribes are. And many of our tribes have 8, 10 allotments they still have as we move around, you know. And so, and these allotments are 80, 160 acres, sometimes only 35, 75. It's whatever land they could get. But in 1910, from 1891, we had 6 allotments. Well, we still have 6 allotments. We had more than that. And what would happen was, in 1910, with the Forest Allotment Act, the light company was coming in, San Joaquin Light, and they wanted the creeks and they wanted the rivers. And so if somebody owned an allotment with Willow Creek, then they would say, well, that's really terrible land. We'll give you better land over there, you know. So if you sign off on this, we'll take that section away from you and give you a half a section of really good land. Yeah, really good land. Now, when I say really good land, what's an allotment? An allotment is what we call Ag 2, not Ag 1. You can't grow a crop on it. You can't have cattle running on it. You can't have timber on it. You can't have any kind of commercial business per se, only on an Ag 1. So allotments were Ag 2. For your family, you could have a pig or 2, you could have a couple of cows, you put an apple tree on there too if that's what you want. Not designed to have commercial business. So how good was the land then? It wasn't. It wasn't, you know. But there we are. We're still there and making the best of it that we can, you know. So, okay, those are the allotment periods. Then during this time period then from 1900 forward, there was a lot of change and movement to, well, number one, the tribes were never conquered, right? The tribes were never beaten in battle. So we got to figure out some other way. And like I said, they tried to divide the reservations, break them down. You know, that didn't work. Then they moved to the allotments. That didn't work. So then they moved to the Rancheria Act. That didn't work. So then they went to reorganization in 1934. And the reorganization was you voted, all the tribes in the state of California, to say rather you wanted to stay under that system or a different system. And so they all voted, and they voted to stay where they are. So that's where it changed. But again, the government was continually trying to decipher that. Now in 1918, many of our people went to war in World War I. And they were promised when they came home land of their own. If they denounced their tribe, if they denounced their culture, they could have land of their own. And there were some, of course, chose that. On the other hand, many did not. But this was always something that the government was always trying to do to our people as we come along. Now, most of our people did not vote until 1948. Only a small number of people voted in 1948. Just about most everybody that started voting voted in 1952, Eisenhower election. So, just to give you an idea, now going to school was another story. Most of our few people attended a bigger school in the 1930s. But by the 1940s, our people were being sent to schools, like Sherman and other schools back in Kansas. So once our young people were being sent away for 4 years at a time, when they left school, they never come home. Or some elders came home way later when they were in their 60s and 70s. They start trickling back into our community, you know? But they lost 40, 50 years of their time with the tribe. And again, it was, you know, about assimilation, moving people in. My mother ran away from the mission school when she was in the 8th grade. And I always say she went home to live with her grandparents and went to the University of the Universe and started learning all about the landscape, the animals, the plants. And this is what, you know, I take forward today. But just this, you know, constant movement, change that we have had to go through. And then in the 50s was termination period, one more shot. Give all the Indian people who have allotments and rancherias, any kind of land that you had a chance to terminate it. Even our North Fork Rancheria terminated for 20 years. But then in 1979, 17 of the 41 tribes that terminated were reinstated, which was good, but sad that only 17 of the 41, you know, could be reinstated. Now, many tribes have been trying for federal recognition. That's a system that is not working. But there's a whole lot of tribes here in the Central Valley that are not federally recognized. So one of the things that we've been doing, we're one of them, that we don't have a treaty. We weren't conquered. So there's our 1.2 million homeland acres, and here's our map of it. So deal with it, because now it's our homeland. You didn't take it from us, and we're taking it back. Now, doesn't mean we exactly own it, but we got to own it up here first and own it in here. And with that, then we go to work on it. And that's what we've been doing with agencies like the Forest Service and federal parks, counties, making agreements with them that we can go out there and take care of our lands. And that's what we're doing, you know. But it's taken time to prove that we can do that. But we're proving it. And the fact that we're doing it, you know, is a big deal. And tribes all over the state now want to do what we're doing. They want us to come in and help them, and so that they can do the same kind of thing. Reclaim not only just their land, but reclaim their culture, reclaim their identity of who they are. This is what we have gone through, you know. And then the last tidbit is what I call our casino Indians. That, yeah, you know, I love them all, but the reality is many of our tribes are pretty wealthy. But you don't see all the Indian people running around wealthy, because the money don't come to them. Money will go to the schools, money will go to the sheriffs, money will go to the hospital, money will go to the zoo, whatever makes for good advertisement. That's what it goes to. But it don't come to the Indian people or their families for them to better their life. But at least somebody's doing better. So, okay, very good. Again, along these same lines, then, bringing us forward to where we are right now is erasure. Again, always something that's looking to what can we do to downsize where the Indians are or what they are. And what is erasure? Well, I have stood for my Cleveland Indians, for the Washington Redskins, for the Atlanta Braves, because once they're gone, we're gone. Even in the schools, now other tribes, I know North Fork Rancheria just supported a school in Clovis and said, hey, no, you're okay with, there's a couple things you might want to clean up. So we did to Weldon, take the tomahawk thing down, You can keep the chief. Fresno High, we said the same thing. You can still be warriors. Just, kind of get rid of that. Kind of tone it down a little bit. And so we're supporting them, trying to say, once we're gone, once we're off the map, we're gone. That's erasure. So that's where we've come from. And I guess it's time for me to go. So, I appreciate your time and kind of give you a long history, but, showing you what we've come through, where we've been, and where we're going. But, right now, I started with this, and I'm going to end with it then. I'm sorry. That, I'm an educator, and I've been leading the way for a long time. And I see that many of my young academia folks, it has taken them a long time to find their voice. But they are finding their voice now. And I see it in writings, I see it in publications, I hear them speak publicly, and they're no longer afraid to say what they need to say. And so, from the Native American standpoint, I told somebody recently, we just went up a gear. We're in third gear now. Look out. We might drop down to fourth gear pretty quick, but right now we're in third gear. We were stuck in first and second gear for a long time. But now things are changing. And as our younger people go through and become scholars themselves and go through, and more of our young people all over America are now becoming Congress people, political leaders. All these different things makes a difference. They have to put up with a lot. You guys all know that. You hear everybody from the president down ridiculing them. They're still there. And more now are becoming congressional leaders. We just got a new Native person from Alaska that's coming in as well. So this is where we are in Native America, is that, we're coming back here. We're still here. And we're not somebody that's like, unless you come to the powwow, we're not all that colorful. We're not any different than you are. Here we are. We sit with you. So thank you for sitting with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goode, for sitting with us, sharing your stories of adaptation and so forth. As I'd mentioned at the outset, if you're willing to take a couple of questions, we can turn it over to people. As we turn and transition to that, I want to remind us to try to keep your questions brief, a sentence or two, and keep it to a question if that's what you have. If you do have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I will be happy to bring over the microphone to you. We do also have some folks who are watching and listening and in on Zoom, and so having the microphone with you helps them to hear you. So questions from you all.
So Ron, thank you very much for the talk tonight. I know that you've also done a lot of work on securing water and also pushing for water rights and water issues within California. Maybe just a little bit, touch more on what is going on some of those fronts, because I know it's active right now.
Oh, well, again, like I was talking about Miller and Lux, I asked Department of Water Resources, how did you get your water rights? I said, because nobody paid us. So far as I'm concerned, we still own our water rights. And so this was voiced in 2008 at a big meeting that Department of Water Resources invited us to. And they've been voicing it ever since, and we've developed what we call a tribal water summit. And I've been the chair of that water summit 4 times, and we're working on our 5th one for 2028. And it's going to be bigger and more exciting than ever. But out of that, there have been a number of tribes who have went to court and got their individual water rights. When they were given their lands, when they received their lands, their water rights came with their lands. Unfortunately, they had to go to court to prove that, but that's now been proven. And so, tribes everywhere. John, what John's saying, we do meadow restoration. The Sierra National Forest, Sequoia Forest, we're working on Inyo. These are the water heads for the San Joaquin River and for other waterways. And when you restore these meadows, you're restoring the watershed. You're taking care of that watershed. You're taking care of the animals. You're taking care of the plants. Right now we have 11 meadows that we restored on the Bass Lake Ranger District out of North Fork, Bass Lake area. Bass Lake did not go down below 55% in the last 3 years. And in the last 3 years, we did not hit our 11.5 inches of rain. We were short. And our snowpack was 60 to 80%. Good, not great. This year's going to be better. This year's going to be different. But the 3 years before this, Bass Lake normally sat at 25 to 30%. They did not go below 55%. Is that because of our meadows? I'd like to think so. And we got a whole lot more. There's 10,000 meadows on the Sierra National Forest. And we only done 15. Well, we got a long ways to go. But hey, we're going. We're getting there. Now working with all the different tribes, the North Fork Rancheria, the Big Sandy Rancheria, Cold Springs, Dunlap, Miwoks, Chuck Chansey's. I got 9 different tribes actually who come to work with me. And this is what we're doing, restoring that water. And we've been working down there where John was at on the San Joaquin River, all aspects of where our water needs to go. And when you drive up and down the state of California and you see these signs say, Newsom, quit wasting water, no water should go to the ocean. Well, take a look at our chaotic atmospheric rivers that we have and ask why. It's why because the ocean is not being cooled down. The waters from our rivers and the snowpack is not going to the ocean to cool it down. And so our ocean is warming up and our ocean is melting the south and north polar. And it's going to keep doing that, and we're going to keep getting all these different kinds of atmospheric rivers. We have no idea when a storm is coming and where it's coming from. We used to be able to predict that. We can't do that no more. But it has not just to do with the fact that our our rivers are how they're being managed. The San Joaquin River alone has 15 dams. 15 dams on the San Joaquin River, and that's just to Millerton. That's not talking about the weirs that are further out. Nobody realizes, what that is. Thank you, buddy.
Yeah, Ron, you touched on your almost dream, your view of taking care of the land now, where you're actively doing it in conjunction with different groups and governments and counties and everything. You see that as a step of vision towards what? The caring of the land towards, what words would you say next? Owning the land? Or where do you think that's going? What's your vision?
Well, I don't really see it as owning the land. But in part because nobody owns the land. We all belong to the land, and the land belongs to us. And so somebody asked me about this the other day, was the word stewardship, because it sounds like a really good word. Oh, you're stewards of the land. I said, no, I'm not. No, because we are here to be a part of the land. We are here, and the land is here to take care of us. And our job is to go out and try to take care of it. It doesn't make us a steward. It doesn't make us in charge. It doesn't give us dominion. It don't do anything for us. It's just that the land is ours, and that includes the water, the plants, the animals. When I go to all these different agencies, I don't care what agency it is, and I say to them, what animals are you responsible for? Who lives here on this land? Give me a list of all the animals and insects and reptiles. They can't do it. And they have paid people in positions. And they give me a list of 6 endangered species. I said, I don't want to see that. In fact, those endangered species shouldn't even be endangered. There's no reason for them. Why is the fisher endangered? Well, because there's only 26 of him left. Okay. What's he eat? Squirrels. What squirrels eat? Acorn. And where's the acorn? On every grove that we go to, 60 black oak trees, and 3 or 4 of them give us acorn. And barely enough to feed me, let alone bear and turkey and pig and deer and woodpecker and blue jay and crow. How are you going to feed all these people if you don't have acorns? And so this is the kind of thing that we're still working on. But that's all a part with the land, what the land should be giving back. But it's got to have help. Thank you.
Dr. Goode, as the senior pastor here at Willow Avenue, I want to thank you for sharing your song with us tonight and ask you if you would be willing, as we go, whenever the last time is, if you would share another song to bless us, if you would offer a prayer or any kind of blessing. Your songs, your prayers are always welcome here. Thank you.
Oh, Togo Patu. Agia, Tabop, Paya, Coop, Koos, Wabi Sabi. We say thank you for the gifts that you have given us of land, water, wind, fire. These gifts are for us to take responsibility of and making sure that we can work with them. Way ya hey hey, way ya hey ya hey hey, way ya hey hey, way ya hey ya hey hey, way ya hey hey, hey ya hey ya hey hey, way ya hey hey, hey ya hey ya hey hey. Hey ya hey yo ho, oh ho ho, oh ho ho ho. Way ya hey hey, way ya hey ya hey hey, way ya hey hey, way ya hey ya hey hey, way ya hey hey, hey ya hey ya hey hey. Hey ya hey yo ho, oh ho ho, oh ho 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 ho. Ooh, 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 ooh. All four directions, all our relatives. Mana, that's a traveling song. All right.
Thank you to each of you. Please join us again next week. Thank you to Dr. Goode.